So let's start reading the story of Kamala Harris. Chapter 1. A Leader is Born. Meet Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has always been for the people as a lawyer, an attorney general, a U.S. senator, and now the Vice President of the United States. Her whole life has been dedicated to working for justice. While she was fighting for others, Kamala also broke down several barriers for many different groups of people. She is the first Black American and South Asian American Vice President. She's also the first woman Vice President. But she won't be the last. In everything she's done, Kamala has worked to make sure that other people also have equal access to opportunity and justice. Kamala always knew that the world was bigger than her. As a young child, she traveled to her parents' home countries, Jamaica and India. She even lived in Canada. Throughout her travels, Kamala was always interested in the ways that people were fighting for fairness. She knew that she wanted to do something to help. That drive led her to be a lawyer, a senator, and ultimately the vice president. Her story is still unfolding. What will she do next? Kamala's World. Kamala Devi Harris was born in Oakland, California on October 20th, 1964. Her parents were both immigrants. They came to the United States from other countries so that they could study at college. Kamala's father, Donald Harris, came from Jamaica to study economics, and her mother, Shyamala Gopalan, came from India to study science. In the 1960s, the world was changing. College students all over the country were taking part in the fight for civil rights. Black and white college students were riding buses together in the segregated South and sitting at lunch counters in peaceful protest. These actions helped end the laws of segregation, which kept black and white people separated. My mother had a saying, "Kamala, you may be the first to do many things, but make sure you're not the last." Donald and Shyamala met on their college campus while they were fighting for justice. They got married in 1963. That was the same year Martin Luther King Jr. made his famous "I Have a Dream" speech. A year later, Kamala was born. Kamala means lotus flower in Sanskrit. Sanskrit is an ancient language of India and is believed to be the oldest language in the world. The lotus flower is an important symbol in Indian culture. The beautiful flower appears to float on water, even though it is rooted firmly in the mud below. Kamala became interested in civil rights and the fight for justice early on. She often attended protest marches with her parents. She would watch the sea of protesters from a stroller. Along with her parents, she would follow the protesters and raise her fist. Power to the people. Chapter 2. The Early Years. Growing up. Kamala's early years in California were happy and carefree. Her sister Maya was born in 1967, and their house was filled with music and food. Education was also very important to the Harris family. Both of Kamala's parents spent a lot of time studying, and books were everywhere. Kamala's dad taught classes, and her mother worked at a lab. She was looking for a cure for cancer. The family liked to take trips together too. Kamala got to see her dad's family in Jamaica and visited her mother's family in India. Kamala learned that fighting for justice ran in her family. Her grandfather fought for the freedom of Indian people for many years. India was ruled by Britain, but the Indian people wanted to be free. In 1947, India gained independence. Kamala's grandfather would tell her stories about the fight for freedom while they walked on the beach. He told her about how important it was to fight for democracy. When Kamala was 7, her father got a job at the University of Wisconsin. He was going to move away to teach. This was very hard on the marriage, and eventually Kamala's parents divorced. Kamala remembered that the only thing her parents argued about when they divorced was who got all the books. Kamala and Maya would see their father on weekends and in the summer. During the rest of the time, they lived with their mother. They went with her to protests, and their house was always filled with interesting people who talked about making the world a better place. Finding her way. Kamala was always a warrior for justice. Before she was born, schools had been segregated. Black and white children did not go to school together, but the civil rights movement changed the laws. One way to bring different children together was to bus them all to the same school. So every day when Kamala went to school, she got onto one big yellow bus that took her out of her neighborhood and across town. This was called interrogation. Kamala didn't really know that word at the time. All she knew was that her school was made up of different friends who spoke different languages. She loved it, so when her mother decided to move to Canada to take a new job, Kamala and Maya were disappointed. The city of Montreal was far away, and it was cold. They would be leaving the warm weather of California for a snowy winter wonderland. Also, people in Montreal spoke French. Could a lotus flower survive the cold? Kamala did. She even staged her first protest in Montreal. Kamala learned that children weren't allowed to play on the lawn in front of her apartment building. It didn't seem fair. Kamala and Maya marched in protest. Eventually, the building manager changed the rules. The children were free to play on the lawn. Kamala's first protest was a success. Malala liked life in Canada, but she missed America. That's why when she graduated from high school, she decided to return to the United States to go to college. She enrolled at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Chapter 3. Kamala the Lawyer. A New Career. Howard University is a historically black school in Washington, D.C. Many famous civil rights leaders were there, including Thurgood Marshall, a Supreme Court justice. It seemed like the perfect place for Kamala. She made a lot of friends. She also worked hard. Kamala studied how the government worked and continued to lead protests. One summer, she interned with a centener and learned what it meant to work in a public office and fight for justice. After she graduated, Kamala went back to California to study law. She attended the University of California, Hastings College of Law in Berkeley. There she decided to become a prosecutor. A prosecutor is a lawyer who proves that someone is guilty. Kamala chose to be this kind of lawyer because she saw a lot of injustice around her. As a prosecutor, she could make sure that people who committed crimes were held responsible. After law school, Kamala took the bar exam. That's the test that allows a person to practice law. Kamala didn't pass. She was devastated, but she didn't give up. Instead, she studied harder and took the test again. The second time, she passed. Finally, Kamala could follow her dreams. Kamala's first job was at the deputy district attorney in Alamanda, a city next to Oakland, where she was raised. Later, she worked in different offices in California, gaining experience helping people. Then she took a job in an office that worked on behalf of families and children. There, Kamala could not only help individual families, but she could also work on the policies or laws and rules that could help families all over the state. Life in San Francisco. In San Francisco, Kamala led the Children's Services. In San Francisco, Kamala led the Child Services Division of City Hall. In that role, she brought charges against people who committed crimes that hurt children. Kamala worked to get families into safe spaces and keep them away from harm. It was important work, and Kamala knew that it really mattered. Protecting innocent people was just one part of her job. Another part of her job was helping change policies and laws so that people always had access to safety and fairness. Kamala began to make recommendations for more funding so she could help even more families. Kamala knew that she wanted to do more, so she decided to run for the office of district attorney. A district attorney, or DA, is the lead prosecutor of a county. The DA manages other lawyers and is the person who decides what cases to prosecute. The lawyers the DA manages are not elected to office, but the DA is. To be the district attorney of San Francisco, Kamala would have to run a political campaign to get votes. Anyone who claims to be a leader must speak like a leader, and that means speaking with integrity and truth. Chapter 4. Working for Justice. Running for office. Kamala didn't have a lot of money or experience running a campaign, but she knew that in order to be elected as a district attorney, she had to go out and meet people in the community before they could support her. People had to know who she was and what she stood for. Kamala's mother helped her get the word out. Together they set up an ironing board in front of the local supermarket and other public areas. The ironing board made the perfect standing desk. They taped up posters and spoke about Kamala's plans. Kamala would meet and greet people who went in and out of the store. She asked questions so she could find out what was important to the community. People asked her questions too. They wanted to know more about her life. Myth and fact. Myth. All lawyers are hired, not elected. Fact. A district attorney is elected by the residents of that county or district. Other people were running for the office too. The first round of the election ended in a tie. Kamala made the top two candidates. Then there was a second election. She won. Kamala celebrated the win with her family. She was now the first woman to be the DA of San Francisco. Her first days on the job were easy. The office was a mess. One of the first things Kamala did was paint the walls. She always believed no problem was too small to fix. Now the office was ready for the important work that needed to be done. An important job. Kamala got to work. She met families who suffered because of gang violence. She pushed for laws that made sure guilty people went to jail and stayed there. But Kamala knew that some people who were charged with crimes didn't need to be punished. Instead, they needed help. Kamala understood that one bad choice can lead to a good person to a challenging situation. She looked for ways to stop the cycles that kept the people from getting ahead. Not everyone agreed with her approach. Kamala decided that the community needed programs to help people who had made mistakes, who had made mistakes get their lives back on track. Who had made mistakes getting their lives back on track. In fact, she called her program Back on Track. Then Kamala met a woman named Latifah Simon. Latifah made bad decisions as a young woman, but was able to help and change her life. But then she began to make different choices. She even won an award for a program she started to help girls in tough situations. Kamala asked Latifah to help with Back on Track, and Latifah agreed. Now Latifah and Kamala were helping women all around the city get a fresh start. Kamala continued to set her sights high. She decided to run for the California Attorney General office. An Attorney General is the head lawyer of a state or even a country. Kamala began another campaign to win votes, but this time her mother couldn't help. Kamala was sick, and then in 2009 her mother died from cancer. Kamala knew that she had to honor her mother's memory by working hard to help others, so that's what she continued to do. Chapter 5. Breaking Barriers. a new role. On January 3rd, 2011, Kamala became the first woman in California history to be elected to the Attorney General office. She was also the first black woman to hold that position, as well as the first South Asian woman. That's a lot of firsts, but Kamala didn't focus on that. Instead, she focused on doing good work. As the Attorney General, Kamala was the top lawyer in the whole state. Her job was to make sure that every voice in California mattered. People in California were having a hard time. Some people were losing their homes because they had bad loans. Several years earlier, the banks had begun to make risky loans to people, loans that people wouldn't be able to pay back. The people needed help. Kamala started investigating. She wanted to hold the banks responsible. California is a big state with a lot of economic power. Kamala used this power to negotiate with the country's 5 biggest banks. She made sure the banks would help people keep their homes. In 2012, Kamala announced an agreement with the biggest technology companies to be more open about how they use people's private information. She also worked to help prison inmates. Instead of just throwing people in jail, Kamala fought to get them education and job training. And she had other priorities, like protecting the environment. Kamala won huge settlements against the oil companies that caused oil spills. Kamala became well known throughout all of California. Then in 2012, Kamala was asked to speak at the Democratic National Convention in North Carolina. At a convention, a political party chooses who will be the candidate for the presidential election. In 2012, the Democrats were standing behind Barack Obama. He was running for a second term as president. When Kamala took the stage, people across the country saw a rising star. People began to learn about her good work and wanted to know more about her. Moving up, Kamala had a lot going on and was working all the time. Her friends thought she needed to have some fun, so they introduced her to a lawyer named Doug Emhoff. Kamala and Doug got along, but Kamala was worried. Doug had 2 children named Cole and Ella. Would they like her? They did. In 2004, Kamala and Doug got married. They wanted to make sure that their wedding included traditions from both of their cultures. Doug stomped on a glass as part of his Jewish culture. Kamala put flowers around his neck as part of their Indian culture. The children even got involved. They came up with the perfect name for their new stepmom, Mamala. Balancing life was challenging. Kamala began a new family tradition of having Sunday dinner at home together. She had more responsibility at work now, so she had to work hard to keep her family traditions alive. What I want young women and girls to know is you are powerful and your voice matters. Kamala thought about how she could do more for her community. As a lawyer, she brought people to justice, but she wondered how she could help change laws and stop injustices before they happen. Then, in 2005, Barbara Boxer, one of California's senators, announced that she wouldn't be running for re-election. Kamala thought about it. As a senator, she would be able to do even more for her state. She would even be able to help change laws. It would be more work, but it would be worth it. Many people believed Kamala would be a good senator, and they spoke up for her. First, the state's governor, Jerry Brown, endorsed her. Then President Obama and Vice President Joe Biden gave her a thumbs up. In November 2016, the election came and Californians cast their votes. Kamala won. In her victory speech, Kamala talked about fighting for the rights and equality of all people. She thought about her mother and the work she had done. Kamala felt like she was walking in her footsteps. She was using her voice to help others. Chapter 6. Senator Harris, working in Washington. Though senators represent their states, they spend most of their time in Washington, D.C., working with others in the new government. That's where they pass new laws. Now that she was a senator, Kamala didn't see her family as often. She tried to make it home for Sunday dinner. She wanted to stay connected to her family and the community she worked for. In Washington, Kamala worked on a lot of the same issues she fought for in California. Only now she was able to create laws that would help people. She continued to work for families. She helped pass laws that would help immigrant children find safe places to live. And she worked hard to protect the environment. Every year, wildfires burn homes in California. Scientists say changes to the environment will make the fires worse. Kamala worked to help people understand these issues, so laws could be passed that would make things better. Myth and fact. Myth. Nothing can be done to help the environment. Fact. Many things help, like conserving water and recycling. Kamala was working hard and making important changes to the laws. Still, she thought, what more could I do? Then she decided there was one more thing. She could run for president. Running for president. On January 21st, 2019, Kamala announced on TV that she was running to become the President of the United States. The day was significant because it was Martin Luther King Jr. Day. She used the slogan "For the People" the first time Kamala set foot in a courtroom. She stood up and proudly said to the judge, "Kamala Harris, for the people." Kamala always stood up to protect the rights of the people. People knew that she was on their side. Kamala's presidential campaign was much harder than her earlier ones in California. She needed more than an ironing board desk. She needed offices. Naturally, she chose Oakland, California for one of her campaigning offices. The other thing she needed was money, so she could afford to get her message out. Kamala traveled all around the country. She spoke at different events and went on TV. She told people about her work and what she wanted to do if she became president. Then it was time for the presidential debates. That's when all the candidates running for office got together to talk about and compare their plans. The debates helped people decide who to vote for. Kamala did well in the debates and defended her position, but on December 3rd, 2019, she decided to end her campaign. Many other candidates were also in the race, and it was hard for Kamala to stand out. When she stepped aside, it marked the end of one journey and the start of something else. Another candidate, former Vice President Joe Biden, went on to win the nomination. He would be the Democratic candidate for president, but Joe saw something special in Kamala, so he asked Kamala to join him. If he won, she would be the vice president. Chapter 7. Becoming Vice President. Many firsts. On August 19, 2020, Kamala prepared to take the stage. Once again, she was going to speak at the Democratic National Convention, but things were different this time. Now she was the candidate for vice president. Also, most of the seats would be empty. A deadly virus called COVID-19 had spread across the country and the world. People were getting sick. In order to stay healthy, people wore masks and stayed apart. The convention would take place in Wisconsin, but people had to watch it at home to make sure everyone stayed safe. Kamala was used to campaigning, but not like this. Before, she would shake hands and give hugs as she went around meeting new people. Now she had to stay apart. When election day came in November, many people didn't want to go out to vote in person. They didn't want to risk getting sick. Instead, they mailed in their ballots. Usually, a winner is announced on election night or early the next day after. After all the votes are counted, because so many people voted by mail, some people worried that not all votes would be counted. The officials knew they wouldn't be able to count all the votes in one night. They knew it might take several days. and they couldn't rush. They didn't want to make any mistakes. Finally, after 4 long days, it was official. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would be the new president and vice president of the United States. Kamala wore a white suit when she made her acceptance speech on Saturday, November 7, 2020. Her white suit was a symbol of all the women before her who had fought for the right to vote. Remembering those women, Kamala said, "I stand on their shoulders." Kamala Harris makes history as the first woman vice president in the United States. She's also the first Jamaican American and the first Indian American to hold that office. Kamala talked about all these firsts in her speech. "While I may be the first woman in this office," Kamala said, "I will not be the last, because every little girl watching tonight sees that this is a country of possibilities." Myth and fact. Myth. Everyone has always had the right to vote in the United States. Fact. Women only began to get the right to vote in 1920, which was 100 years before the first woman became vice president. Kamala's legacy. On January 20th, 2021, Kamala was sworn in as vice president, standing in front of the Capitol building. In Washington, D.C., with Doug at her side, she held up her hand and swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. Joe Biden made the same promise. A few hours later, Kamala gave her first speech as vice president, with the Washington Monument behind her. She spoke as American aspiration, calling Americans bold, fearless, and ambitious. These are the same traits that Kamala's mother inspired her. Kamala had reached the next stage in a journey she began as a little girl in a stroller, attending protests with her parents. As a child, Kamala watched her parents fight for justice. Then she followed in her footsteps throughout her career. She kept pushing to make sure that people had what they needed. As a lawyer, she fought to protect people's rights. As a senator, she fought to create laws that would protect people. What will she do next? Her legacy as vice president is still being written. And to the children of our country, regardless of your gender, our country has sent to you a clear message. Dream with ambition, lead with conviction, and see yourself in a way that others might not see you, simply because they've never seen it before. And we will applaud you every step of the way. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed this book. I hope you learned something from this book, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye!